Would you stay silent if a fallen hero was disrespected, or would you rise to defend their honor? This story happened, but it's hard to believe how it ended. I didn't expect this. On one unforgettable flight, Barron Trump made a choice that left everyone speechless. The boarding process for Flight 729 to Washington, D.C. was well underway. Passengers shuffled down the aisle, placing their bags in overhead compartments and settling into their seats. The usual hum of pre-flight chatter filled the cabin. But outside, near the small airplane windows, the crew had stopped what they were doing. A black hearse had pulled up alongside the plane on the tarmac. Moments later, an honor guard carefully unfolded an American flag, draping it over a casket. Inside the aircraft, a hush fell over a few observant passengers. The solemnity of the moment was evident. Then, a crew member's voice came over the intercom, calm yet firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will experience a short delay as we honor a fallen soldier being transported to their final resting place in Washington, D.C." Most passengers understood the gravity of the moment. But not everyone. A man in a sharply pressed suit scoffed audibly, rolling his eyes. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "We have schedules to keep." A younger woman nearby chimed in. "Why couldn't they do this after we left? Some of us have places to be." Their words sliced through the stillness like a blade. Uneasy glances flickered across the rows. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged disapproving looks. A mother pulled her young daughter close, shielding her from the callous remarks. Outside, the honor guard stood at attention, their movements deliberate and full of respect as they carried the casket toward the aircraft's cargo hold. But inside the cabin, tension brewed. What the passengers did not know was that a young man in the back row was about to change the course of this moment entirely. The overhead bins clicked shut, seatbelts snapped into place, and the flight attendants moved briskly to keep the boarding process on track. The honor guard reached the aircraft door, carefully maneuvering the flag-draped casket into the hold. Seated near the middle of the plane, the man in the suit leaned back with an exaggerated sigh. "This is taking forever," he grumbled loudly, ensuring those around him could hear. His impatience emboldened others. 2 rows behind, a woman whispered, "What is the big deal? It's not like the soldier knows we are waiting." A ripple of discomfort spread throughout the cabin. Some passengers turned their eyes down to their phones, desperate to escape the weight of the moment. Near the window, an elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue and whispered to the man beside her. "That could have been my grandson." In the very last row, a tall young man sat in silence. His presence had gone unnoticed until now. His name was Barron. While a few passengers might have recognized his face, he had not drawn attention to himself. Dressed simply in a dark jacket, he leaned forward, his brow slightly furrowed. Unlike many others, he was not mindlessly scrolling through his phone or fidgeting with his belongings. His eyes were locked on the window, watching as the honor guard completed their duty with care and precision. The murmurs of impatience grew louder, the atmosphere thick with tension. Barron knew this moment called for more than silence. A man a few rows ahead abruptly stood, addressing a flight attendant with an exasperated tone. "Look, I am sorry, but I have a connection to make. How much longer is this going to take?" His voice carried an edge, not just impatience, but disregard. The flight attendant, ever professional, remained composed. "Sir, this process should only take a few more minutes. We appreciate your patience as we honor a fallen service member." Her words did not seem to make much of an impact. The man scoffed, slumping back into his seat, muttering under his breath. A few passengers nearby exchanged knowing glances, smirking in agreement, as if the delay was some personal offense against them. The woman from earlier spoke up again, her voice sharp and irritated. "This is exactly why airlines are a disaster. They focus on these over-the-top displays instead of sticking to the schedule." It was as if the sheer audacity of the moment fed the discontent, giving strength to those who shared her view. The cabin, once filled with a solemn hush, now buzzed with a growing wave of frustration. Near the front of the plane, a veteran stiffened, his jaw clenching, though he said nothing. An elderly woman by the window gripped her tissue tighter, shaking her head in silent disapproval. Barron watched it all unfold from the back of the plane. He glanced toward his security detail seated a few rows ahead. Their faces remained unreadable, giving away nothing, but his expression darkened as he scanned the disgruntled passengers. The faint reflection of the honor guard's movements shimmered in the window beside him. Then, as the final murmurs of complaint echoed through the cabin, Barron made a decision, one that would shift the entire atmosphere. The tension in the aircraft grew, dissatisfaction weaving its way through the rows. But in the back, Barron Trump leaned forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over the seat in front of him. Until now, his presence had been almost unnoticed, but that was about to change. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, calm. A nearby passenger caught the motion and turned to look. Recognition spread like wildfire. Whispers rippled through the cabin. "Is that Barron Trump?" The impatience that had simmered just moments ago now blended with curiosity. Barron cleared his throat, not loudly, but just enough to cut through the tension. His voice, steady and firm, carried a weight that immediately commanded attention. "Excuse me," he said, his tone calm yet authoritative. "I would like to say something." The murmurs ceased almost instantly. Heads turned. Passengers who had been grumbling moments earlier shifted uneasily in their seats. Even the man in the suit, the one who had been the most vocal, glanced over his shoulder, his expression wary. Barron let the silence settle before speaking again. "I understand that everyone is in a hurry," he continued, his hands resting on the back of the seat in front of him. "But that casket down there belongs to someone who made the ultimate sacrifice for this country. Someone who gave up their plans, their future, everything, so that the rest of us could have the freedoms we enjoy." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. The plane had gone completely silent, save for the soft hum of the engines. But Barron was not finished. He looked from passenger to passenger, meeting their gazes one by one. "You do not have to know their name or their story," he said, his voice even but filled with emotion. "What matters is the respect they deserve, not just for their sacrifice, but for the countless others like them who have given everything for this country." A weight settled over the cabin. Even those who had been most impatient moments before found themselves unable to speak. The man in the suit squirmed in his seat, his bravado fading. The young woman who had spoken earlier looked down at her hands, avoiding the stares around her. Barron's voice softened, though it lost none of its conviction. "I think we can all spare a few minutes to honor someone who can no longer speak for themselves. They have given far more than any of us will in these moments of waiting." The cabin crew exchanged glances, visibly moved. Even the veteran at the front, who had remained silent throughout, turned slightly in his seat, his hardened expression softening just a bit. Then, in a quiet, unexpected gesture, Barron did something that no one had anticipated. He reached into his carry-on bag and pulled out a small American flag. Holding it carefully, he stepped into the aisle and placed it on the empty seat nearest to the window, directly above where the casket rested below. "This seat belongs to them," he said simply before stepping back. The simplicity of the act spoke louder than anything else. And then, something happened that no one could have predicted. The entire plane seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. The flag on the empty seat became an undeniable symbol, a silent tribute, visible to all and impossible to ignore. The veteran near the front of the plane stood up, his movements slow but deliberate. "Son," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "thank you for reminding us what is important." He gave Barron a respectful nod before placing his hand over his heart. Others began to follow, standing or sitting straighter, their hands mirroring the veteran's gesture. The man in the suit, who had been so vocal earlier, looked around at the sea of solemn faces. His confidence seemed to waver under the weight of the moment. I did not mean to be disrespectful," he stammered, his voice barely audible. The young woman beside him flushed red, her earlier frustration replaced with visible guilt. But it was not just shame that filled the cabin, something deeper was happening. A teenage boy in a hoodie, who had been quietly watching from a window seat, pulled out his earbuds and muttered, that is cool," his voice tinged with newfound respect. A mother whispered something to her child, who looked at Barron with wide, curious eyes. The cabin crew, touched by what was unfolding, moved with quiet reverence as they finalized preparations for takeoff. A flight attendant walked over to Barron, her voice soft as she said, "Thank you for doing that. It means more than you know." As the plane taxied down the runway, another wave of emotion swept through the passengers, cementing this moment in their hearts. A hushed reverence filled the cabin. The earlier impatience had dissolved into quiet introspection. Outside the window, the honor guard stood resolute, saluting as the aircraft began to move, their figures framed against the golden light of the setting sun. Mid-flight, the pilot made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for your patience earlier. We are carrying the remains of a fallen soldier today, and it is a solemn honor to have them aboard. Let us take a moment of silence to reflect and pay our respects." The entire cabin obeyed without hesitation. Heads bowed, hands folded, eyes closed, it was as if everyone felt the weight of the moment in their own way. The man in the suit, who had earlier voiced his frustration, clasped his hands together, his expression now solemn. The young woman who had echoed his complaints wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Barron remained in his seat at the back, his focus unwavering. He was not looking for recognition or thanks. His intention had been simple, to remind everyone of the value of respect and sacrifice. His security detail exchanged a subtle glance, acknowledging the young man's composure with quiet pride. When the plane landed in Washington, D.C., the passengers remained seated as requested. No one rushed to disembark. Instead, they watched as the honor guard retrieved the casket, standing tall as they carried it from the aircraft. A ripple of applause began, soft at first, then swelling into something powerful and unified. Barron did not clap. Instead, he placed his hand over his heart, a small but meaningful gesture that resonated deeply. As the passengers exited the plane, many carried something far greater than their luggage, a renewed understanding of what it means to honor and remember. The mood was strikingly different from when they had boarded. The earlier frustration had vanished, replaced by quiet thoughtfulness. Some exchanged soft words with the cabin crew. Others nodded to Barron as they passed, their expressions filled with gratitude and respect. Near the exit, the man in the suit hesitated. Turning back to Barron, he swallowed hard and said, "You were right. I needed that reminder." Barron simply nodded, his expression calm yet firm. The young woman followed shortly after, whispering a heartfelt, "Thank you." Outside on the tarmac, the honor guard loaded the casket into a waiting hearse. A small group of onlookers saluted. Among them stood the soldier's grieving family, their faces etched with both pain and pride. The passengers, many of whom had been strangers just hours before, lingered by the airport windows, watching in silence. In that moment, they were no longer businessmen, tourists, or weary travelers. They were witnesses to a collective reminder of sacrifice and unity. As Barron quietly left the terminal with his security detail, he glanced back one last time, taking in the sight of people standing shoulder to shoulder, moved by the power of one small act. This is not just a story about a fallen soldier. It is a story about the importance of respect. Respect for those who give everything. Respect for the moments that demand our attention, no matter how inconvenient they may seem. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on the sacrifices of others. Let us carry forward the lessons of humility and gratitude, one small gesture at a time. And if you believe this message is worth sharing, spread it. The world needs more reminders of what truly matters.